Hi there, I hope you're well. In this video we're going to be taking a look at the new Benchdogs quad MFT hinge system. So this is the new Benchdogs rail hinge. It's not available for sale yet, it is available for pre-order, and I believe the first 3 batches already sold out, so you'll be pre-ordering for the 4th batch. Fairly obviously, if it's not available for sale, I haven't purchased it. This was supplied for review by Benchdogs. I haven't been paid to make this video or to say nice things about the product, but as a Benchdogs affiliate, I may earn from qualifying sales, so be sure to use the offer code 10-minute workshop at checkout for a 5% discount across the board at Benchdogs Co.uk. And thanks so much to Ralph at Benchdogs for extending that offer, and also for letting me have a quick first look at this product. And a quick look is all this video is. It's not going to be a review of this product because this is pre-production, and if and when I get a final shipping production sample, I'll then do a full review on it and give it a comparison to the dashboard hinge and the Festool OEM hinge. But for now, this is just going to be a quick look at the pros and cons of this system, because it is different to all other guardrail hinges. Incidentally, if you're new to the world of multifunction tables or MFT benches, this is probably not the place to start. I've done an awful lot of videos on MFTs before. There's an entire playlist, I'll link that up down below, dedicated to Festool MFT and MFT alike benches. I've talked about the pros and cons of rail hinges versus other methods of getting straight and square cuts. When I did my previous MFT build, I did a precursor to that when I talked about all the hardware options, and that goes into all the pros and cons of what were then the currently available hinges. That's a good place to start if you really want to get the full gory story on that. Long story short, the Benchdogs system has taken a different approach to the other rail hinge systems. Most of them attached to either extrusion or a T-track along the front of an MFT style bench like this. The Benchdogs system though uses quad dogs, so it actually attaches to the MFT top, not to the side. This means that this is finally a hinge system that you could use if you're just using an MFT top or an MFT slab, which are very popular with guys like installers because they're relatively lightweight and easy to move around and easy to use just off a pair of trestles. This approach does have a few pros and cons though, and that's one of the things that I want to explore in this video. Before we get into any of that though, let's take a quick look at the rail hinge and the similarities to other systems, because there's only so many ways you can actually design a rail hinge. The rail hinge comes in 2 parts with an optional 3rd part. A little bit more on that later on. And the hinge is made from a combination of stainless steel and aluminium. I said earlier on that this is a pre-production sample, and the production items will have all the usual anodizing and laser etching and Benchdogs branding that you've come to expect from a Benchdogs quality product. The rail attaches to the hinge with a pair of stout and custom-made T-bolts, and the position of these T-bolts is customizable for different rail types, whether that's Festool, Maffel or Bosch, Makita, Metabo, DeWalt, Evolution, Triton, Urbar, Shepak or the Craig ACS. They should all find a position on this hinge. There's also a little bit of wiggle room in these T-bolts in the T-slots to allow for any slight out of squareness on the MFT top. The front rail support has a little nubbin that locates in the same underrail T-slot, and again this is repositionable for the various rail types. As usual, the hinge and front rail support are height adjustable, and there's around 100mm or 4 inches of material thickness that can be accommodated. That's significantly more than most track saws can cut, so if you have the need for some deep trenching cuts, then this may well be the hinge for you. Now, I said earlier on that locating the hinge on the grid of holes in an MFT top has some pros and cons. One of the benefits, of course, is that it always aligns with the column of holes, and that's especially useful if you're also using the Benchdogs fence on fence dogs, as that will always align with the row of holes. So once you've checked that your grid is square, there's no need to recheck or square up if you remove the hinge and fence to use the bench for something else like assembly. The drawback of this approach is that the hinge and front rail support mounted mounting plates actually sit on the bench top, so that 6mm thickness of the plate might get in the way or reduce the depth of cut from front to back. Now, I'm not privy to the design decisions or philosophy behind the Benchdogs design, but I'd imagine this is why they've opted not to use the existing grid of holes, but instead locate the hinge and front rail support off a pair of holes that are closer to the edge of the MFT top. So in a normal MFT or MFT3 top like this one, it has a grid of holes 11 across and 7 high, and those holes are on 96mm centres, but typically around 70mm away from the edges. The Benchdogs hinge aligns these mounting holes with columns, but at 24mm centres away from the edge, and this is where the optional third part that I mentioned earlier on comes into play. This is the Benchdogs 346 template, and it's there to help you get the holes in exactly the right place. In its centre position, it puts the hole exactly halfway between the row or column of holes at 48mm centres, with two other positions, 32 and 64mm, if you can use them. Now, it's got to be said that including VAT, this template is a £36 extra on top of the £180 including VAT for the hinge. You could, of course, measure and mark this out carefully and drill out your own holes, but as your whole rail squareness hinges on these being accurate, I wondered how easy that would be, so I decided to try it out. So longer-term viewers will recognise my backyard budget build MFT. I made this with an overhang at the back, so it's useful for clamping. So I'm going to put the hinge on that side. I'm going to use the template to do that, and I'm going to have a go at drilling out my own holes for the front rail support. We'll see how this goes. I've got my 20mm bit set in my router. I've got a 30mm guide bush centered in that, and I've got my template. So I need to spin this around, get the first pair of holes cut, and then we'll do the difficult one. The template's really easy to fit, and as you'd expect, it makes boring the two holes a fast and flawless process. Of course, the first thing I've got to do is take the damn hinge off. So I'm just lining this edge of the guide rail up by eye against this side of the next column of holes. Then I'm going to put my router in a guide rail adapter like this, reference off these, then move it back to the right position and bore the holes. That's the plan. Anyway. But I think that's looking in pretty good position. With the rail clamped carefully down and a pencil mark made for the hole centres, I can line up the router with the last hole in the column. Then move the router down into position, mark that position with a rail stop, and bore the hole. Then without moving the rail, I can move the router across on the rods to the next column of holes, put it in position, lock it on, move it back to the stop and bore the second hole. With the router rail removed and the hinge reattached, I can fit the main rail back on. and add in the Benchdogs fence on Benchdogs. And then check it all for square. Whew. Okay, so a couple of obvious talking points here. One is obviously, I think we can consider that a success. The front has gone on absolutely square, no concerns with that at all. The rail lifts up out of the way without any issue, and for the people who are wondering, yes, it does go all the way back, so it supports itself. Clearly, it is entirely possible, entirely doable to put a pair of holes in here on 96mm centers, 24mm back from the edge without using the template. Was it easier to use the template? You bet it was. And I think if you're just doing the one, maybe consider it if you're feeling confident. If you've perhaps got more than one MFT in mind, or MFT top that you'd want to attach a rail to, then yeah, I think springing for the template is well worth it. At the risk of stating the obvious, all this assumes you're using a regular MFT. If you're just using an MFT top on trestle, say, then you can simply notch the edge of the top and use the last holes in the column. Or if you're custom making an MFT top, then you could simply add in an extra row of holes and get those holes closer to the edges. Now, one mistake I did make is that I should have set the hinge further inboard, and if I'd done that, then the hinge overhang at the back there would be about 185mm, so you do need some space behind your bench to allow for that. A couple of other talking points I touched on earlier on. Obviously you've got the hinge plate and front rail support plate sitting on top of the bench. That's going to reduce your depth of cut. An obvious way around that would be simply to use a spoiler board, which raises the bed effectively and means that you can get right back to the front rail support here. With the fence in place, that increases it to about 650, 655mm crosscut capacity, which is pretty impressive off a regular standard plain vanilla MFT3 top like this one. So yeah, another way around it, which has been mentioned, is to route these into the top itself. You could do that, so they sit down a little bit lower. One thing you have to watch out for is that the quad dogs use two little rubber grommets, and if you take 6mm off that, you're only going to have one of those actually gripping. Again, how much of a problem will that be? I don't really know, but I assume there was a reason why they were designed with two of them rather than just one. And if it's your guide rail hinge, then there's quite a lot of stresses going on with that lifting up and down constantly. So I think I'd want both of those little rubber grommets in the hole. Could you then use a thicker board? Well, you could, but then you have problems with the guide rail clamps because they won't go through anything thicker than that unless you then start chamfering the inside of the bottom edge of these. And then, you could do that, but hey, there's 77 of those to go. I think I'd just as soon use a simple spoiler board on top, as I've been doing for years and years with a regular MFT, because it's just an easy way to protect the bench top, to be perfectly honest. But overall, yeah, very impressed with the overall quality of the product. No real issues with any of it. The knobs are really nicely made. They're really nice to handle. Stainless steel with nicely knurled bits to hold, and everything sort of feels very solid. I think by the time this gets into production, when it's got all the branding and the anodizing and the laser etching, it'll be a beautiful product. No rail hinge is cheap, and this one sits squarely between the OEM Festool one and the dashboard PWS one. By the time you get the dashboard one shipped here to Britain and duties paid. So, I'll do a direct comparison with these when I've got a production version of the Benchdogs Quad MFT hinge. But I'll call this one done for now. I hope that's answered any or many of your questions. If you've got any more, let me know in the comments down below. Incidentally, you will of course need a 20mm router bit for boring the holes that the front and rear, the hinge and the front rail support sit into. I'm sort of collecting those. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in a little roundup of how they do, because they all vary very slightly, and it's very interesting to see the differences between them. So yeah, let me know about that. Anyway, I'll call this one down for now. Thank you ever so much for taking a look. Thank you, as always, to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members whose endless patience and fantastic conversations really help me shape the publicly facing videos that we have here on YouTube. But that's it for this one. Thanks ever so much for taking a look, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, take care.